Thank you for joining us for this interview on Africa 24. Today we'll be receiving on set Mrs. Pamela Coke-Hamilton. She's the Chief Executive Officer of the International Trade Center on the occasion of the first ever Afro-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum here in Bridgetown, Barbados. Thank you, Ma, for joining us on Africa 24.
Thank you so much for having me.
So as a Jamaican, how do you feel about this first ever Afro-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum that comes at a time when boosting partnerships is key to overcoming crisis?
To be honest, it's actually a dream come true. I am Jamaican, but I turned out to be 48% Nigerian because I did my DNA after having gone to Ghana and visiting the Cape Coast Castle and really seeing in a very real way what the transatlantic slave trade did to us. And I think bringing Africa and the Caribbean together is not only important from an economic perspective. Marcus Garvey did say that it's not just about the political and the spiritual, the economics is important. And you define who you are as a people and you define your future based on your economic strength. And bringing Africa and the Caribbean together is going to determine what our strength will be moving forward in the 21st century. So this Afro-Caribbean first ever trade and investment fair is a step in that direction to realize that kind of vision.
So in July 2022, you were appointed CEO of the International Trade Center, the ITC. What have been your priority objectives over the last 2 years?
July 2020.
Oh, July 2020. That's what I said.
Oh, I thought I said 2022.
No, 2020.
2020. Yes. Well, first of all, it is to recognize that when I entered, we were in the middle of COVID. And as a result, everything that we did was in the context of an existing crisis. So we had to change how we were going to operate and how we were going to enable the organization to continue to function effectively. One of the things that we did was we looked at what are the key areas that needed greater attention and that could be what I call our moonshots. One was the youth. The fact that Africa will have by 2050 more than 65% under 25. It's definitely going to say something about what the youth forum in Africa is going to be. The second is on women's economic empowerment. The fact that gender is going to be even more important given the importance of what women bring to the table and ensuring that gender equality becomes one of the mainstays of economic development. The third is looking at green energy, green transition. All of us are victims of climate change. All of us have seen, just this summer alone, has told us how bad it's going to be moving forward. The drought, the rain, the flooding, the emptying of rivers. So one of the things that's going to be really important is how do we transition to alternative energy, to green energy, to renewable energy, so that we can address and mitigate and adapt to climate change. And that's one of the other areas. The fourth area that was very important was the digital connectivity. Without connectivity, and that became so clear during COVID, businesses can't sell. If you're not online, you don't exist. And so one of the biggest elements is how do we get more of Africa connected? How do we drill down and ensure that the level of connectivity increases across the African continent so we can take advantage of the AFCFTA? A huge element is the regional integration process. We've been one of the biggest supporters of the African Continental Free Trade Area. We've signed an MOU both with AFCFTA and today with Afro-Exim Bank. And this is a critical element for us in terms of supporting Africa's growth and development and expansion.
So during one of the sessions of this Afro-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum, you presented a trade report on the export levels between Africa and the Caribbean. Can you tell us about the key findings of this report?
Well, the first finding, which shouldn't be surprising, is that the trade is negligible at best, 0.1%, which frankly, is in a way kind of shameful, but not surprising. Many of the issues that cause this, of course, have to do with logistics, issues of transportation, issues of distance, also issues of information, regulatory capacity, market intelligence, all of these elements. But if they are addressed, the opportunities between the Caribbean and Africa are phenomenal. First of all, there could be a trade exchange of over $1 billion by 2026. Between now and 2026, Africa could increase its exports to the Caribbean by 171 million year over year, and the Caribbean to Africa 80 million year over year. That's significant compared to what it is now. In addition to which, the exchange in terms of services trade, the potential is over $500 million. And that is a phenomenal opportunity in the area of tourism, in the area of the creative industries, and professional services, among others. So what we want to be able to do is, how do we put in place the mechanisms to make this a reality? What are the changes that need to be made both in Africa and in the Caribbean to enable this kind of trade to take place? And this ranges from things such as perception, the fact that, oh, Africa is so far. Nobody ever says China is so far. Does anybody ever say that? We import from China. Nobody ever says China is so far. And so it's the question of the perceptions that we have about Africa and the Caribbean. And basically, honestly, the colonial constructs that have been set up over the years, where you have the metropole and then you have the satellites. And we've always been satellites. And the satellites never talk to each other. The satellites talk to the metropole. This is changing that. Let's start talking to each other. South-South trade. How do we engage? And how do we also bring back together the same people? Because that's what we are. We just happen to be on the other side of the world a bit. But, those were the main findings. And the opportunities are clear. And let's see how we can move to make these happen.
As CEO of the International Trade Center, can you tell us about the work your institution is doing to boost intra-African trade through the AFCFTA?
Sure. One of the main areas that we're working in, besides the fact that we also work with the AFCFTA Secretariat on the tariff negotiations and on the goods and so on, one of the key elements that we have worked on is helping businesses to actually utilize the AFCFTA. Because one of the things that we have seen, and having worked in the Caribbean internationally, in the hemisphere, one of the biggest weaknesses of trade agreements is that they look nice on paper, but the private sector never uses them, at least in the developing world. And so we have tons of trade agreements. We have a plethora of them, all on shelves. They're very nicely written. But the private sector does not know how to utilize it. So we, in partnership with Afreximbank, produced a module that's how to export under the AFCFTA. And we have been training different private sector partners, different institutions, different BSOs on how to export under the AFCFTA, how to utilize the agreement, how to take advantage of the opportunities. And that's one of the main elements, the main ways in which we have been helping with the implementation of the AFCFTA. We also have Africa Trade Observatory, which is one of the elements of the AFCFTA. And what it does is it provides the kind of information that private sector needs on different barriers to trade, rules of origin requirements, all of that, so that it provides a kind of informational portal that enables businesses to make decisions and also to submit concerns about various markets.
So despite the financial engagements done by many development institutions like your institution, like Afreximbank, young entrepreneurs, African entrepreneurs and SMEs still have difficult accessing finance to operate their businesses' capital. So what's not going right? How can the problem of access to finance be actually tackled?
The issue of access to finance is a multifaceted problem. One, traditional finance continues to dominate. And because traditional finance has continued to dominate, many of the banks and the institutions that offer financing, first of all, do not know how to measure an intellectual property. They don't know how to, ascribe value to an idea. They still want collateral, a piece of paper that says you own this piece of land or this car or whatever. The requirements in terms of, age even, is still a factor. You have to show a job letter, you know. These are the kinds of old mechanisms that continue to dominate. A few of the areas that we've been working with in terms of access to finance, looking at angel investors, looking at venture capital, looking at you know, funds, venture funds that can be utilized to help young entrepreneurs. I think what is going to be very important is working also with some of the traditional institutions to change their perception and perspective in terms of funding new ideas, funding entrepreneurship, you know, creating that kind of ability. And we've been working with a few of the banks to do that. So it's a slow process, but I think it's picking up because more and more banks are realizing that if they don't invest in the young entrepreneurs, if they don't invest in young people, they're going to lose out in the long run.
Thank you so much for honoring our invite.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was it for this interview. Thank you for watching. We have more programs coming up on Africa 24.
Thank you.